You worked with Daniel Day-Lewis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just reading this article of the 5 most difficult actors in the world, and Daniel Day-Lewis was like number 1. Did you find him difficult to work with?
Not at all.
You probably admired him, right?
Well, yeah, but I heard that he's very into his process, so I thought it was going to be very closed off, but he couldn't have been a more generous. And
in 2017, the world believed they saw the last of one of cinema's most enigmatic figures. Daniel Day-Lewis, 3-time Oscar winner, master of transformation, a chameleon who disappeared into every role, retired. The lights dimmed, the applause faded, and for nearly a decade, the silence was total. But now, there's a whisper, a stirring in the shadows, a breath held across the film industry and among his audience.
What about Daniel Day-Lewis? Is there any little thing that do you ever find yourself, because you're supposed to be listening as an actor, but when you're acting with Daniel Day-Lewis, are you so enamored sometimes by, is it like you're like, wow, I'm acting with this guy?
The transformation is so comprehensive.
Because in Anemone, Daniel Day-Lewis returns, not just to acting, but to collaborate with his own son, Ronan Day-Lewis, who for the first time steps up as feature director, co-writer. It's more than a comeback, it's a reckoning. Why this story now? Because the stakes are deeply personal. Because it's not just about what it means to return, but why. It's about art and identity. About when you walk away and when something pulls you back. From an isolated recluse to the fierce, uncompromising Ray Stoker. From a long silence to cameras rolling in Manchester. In 1980s-like streets, amid old prop cars getting ticketed. Amid a production under pressure. Not just technical, but emotional. Because this isn't a creature feature or a loud blockbuster. This is a psychological drama. Deep, intimate, haunted. So here's what we're going to do. We'll dive behind the scenes of Anemone. Its secrets, its conflicts, the man who turned away from spotlight, and the son who coaxed him back.
We'll examine how Day-Lewis the actor, Day-Lewis the father, and Day-Lewis the myth confront loss, identity, and time. And by the end, we'll ask, what does it mean to retain, not for glory, but for truth? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to go back. Daniel Day-Lewis wasn't just an actor, he was the actor. Known for his obsessive devotion, his transformations became legend. He lived inside characters, often disappearing so deeply that the line between man and role blurred. From Christy Brown in My Left Foot, to Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, to Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, his performances weren't just acting. They were possession. He won 3 Academy Awards for Best Actor, the most of any man in history. And yet, at the height of his reign, Day-Lewis stepped away. In 2017, after Phantom Thread, he announced his retirement, leaving fans shocked. He said he could no longer continue, that the cost was too high, the process too consuming. For many, it was the end of an era. But even in silence, the myth grew. Each year away only added to the weight of his absence. Why'd he stopped? Would he ever return? Whispers circled in film circles, but Day-Lewis never offered more than vague reflections, until now. In recent interviews leading up to Anemone, Daniel revealed the truth. He never meant retirement as permanent. He admitted, almost ruefully, that perhaps he should have kept his mouth shut. Because in those years of absence, a sadness lingered. A sadness made sharper by the fact that his own son, Ronan, was becoming a filmmaker without him. And so, what began as distance became an ache. What began as finality became possibility. When Ronan came with a script, co-written, aching with psychological tension and family ghosts, the call was too personal to ignore. This wasn't just a role. It was a return through bloodlines, through art. A father stepping into his son's vision. And in that choice, everything changed. When Anemone was first whispered into existence in late 2024, few could believe it. Daniel Day-Lewis, after 7 long years, had signed on. But the announcement wasn't just about an actor's comeback. It was about a family venture. Ronan Day-Lewis, Daniel's son, would direct and co-write. The film was conceived not as spectacle, but as something far more intimate. A psychological drama set in northern England, about fractured family bonds and the shadows that linger in silence. Daniel takes on the role of Ray Stoker, a recluse haunted by loss and memory. Opposite him, Sean Bean plays his estranged brother, Jem. Samantha Morton, as Nessa, adds another dimension to the wounded family, while Samuel Bottomley and Sophia Oakley-Green round out the cast. On paper, the story seems small, but in truth, it's enormous, because it reflects not just fictional characters, but the very dynamics at play behind the camera. A father navigating his son's direction, a son daring to guide a legend. The production itself carried its own drama. In Manchester, October 2024, principal photography began. Streets were dressed in 1980s detail, prop cars lined the roads, and yet, reality intruded. Traffic wardens issued tickets to production vehicles, a bizarre but telling reminder that even giants like Daniel Day-Lewis are not immune to the everyday bureaucracy of filmmaking. It became a minor headline, but symbolized the delicate balance between art and disruption. Meanwhile, the creative team assembled around Ronan spoke volumes. Jane Petrie on costumes, Chris Oddy on production design, and cinematography by Ben Fordesman. The world of Anemone was shaping into something stark, textured, and uncompromising. And when, in September 2025, it was revealed that Bobby Kurlick, known for his haunting, atmospheric scores, would compose the music, the picture became clear. This was not a glossy Hollywood return. It was a descent, a psychological excavation. But beneath the surface of production notes and press releases lies the real tension. Why now? Why would Daniel return, after swearing off the screen? Why risk tarnishing a flawless career? The answer is both professional and achingly personal. By the fall of 2025, Anemone had already transcended the boundaries of a typical indie release. It wasn't just a film, it was an event. Every festival announcement, every casting detail, every sliver of news carried the weight of expectation. And yet, with that anticipation came pressure, contradictions, and even controversy. For Daniel Day-Lewis, the decision to return after publicly retiring wasn't simple. He admitted in interviews that he regretted the very announcement of his retirement. "I should have kept my mouth shut," he confessed, suggesting that words had boxed him into a narrative he never intended. He explained that walking away in 2017 wasn't about losing love for acting. It was about survival. Phantom Thread had hollowed him out. The process was so consuming, so merciless, that he feared he could not go on. And now, here he was, stepping back into the fire. Critics and fans alike began to ask, is this courage, or is it compromise? Is this the triumphant return of cinema's greatest actor, or the unraveling of a legacy too sacred to touch? The press seized on every angle. Some painted Anemone as a story of redemption, a father finding renewed purpose through his son's vision. Others framed it as risky, questioning whether Day-Lewis, at 68, could still channel the same intensity that once defined him. Social media lit up with debates. Was he doing this for love of art, or because he missed the limelight? The tension grew further when Ronan Day-Lewis's role as first-time director was scrutinized. Could a newcomer truly handle not just any actor, but the Daniel Day-Lewis? The father-son dynamic became both a selling point and a source of speculation. Was this collaboration a bonding act, or a battlefield of clashing egos? And through it all, Daniel's words haunted the conversation. "I never intended to retire, really." If that was true, then what had these 7 years of silence been? Retreat? Healing? Or denial? Because Anemone was no longer just a movie. It was a gamble, the escalation of expectation. And for Daniel, it meant stepping back into a storm he once swore he had escaped. To truly grasp the weight of Anemone, we have to look beyond the headlines, into the craft, the psychology, the personal stakes buried deep within this project. Because this isn't just Daniel Day-Lewis putting on a costume again. This is him confronting the very demons that drove him into silence. Day-Lewis has long been infamous for his method. He didn't play roles, he became them. In My Left Foot, he stayed in character as Christy Brown, being carried around set between takes. In There Will Be Blood, his all-man Daniel Plainview consumed him so thoroughly that the role still echoes as one of cinema's most terrifying studies of greed and ambition. But that same intensity came with a cost. He once described finishing Phantom Thread as feeling hollowed out, as though the role had extracted something vital he could never get back. So when he agreed to portray Ray Stoker in Anemone, the question wasn't just, could he still do it? It was, how much of himself would it take? Ray is described as a recluse, a man estranged from his family, lost in cycles of memory and regret. It is a role that mirrors Daniel's own life in eerie ways. A figure withdrawn from the world, living in silence, until something, family, pulls him back. Behind the camera, Ronan Day-Lewis crafted a space both reverent and unflinching. Directing his father meant dismantling myth while honoring legacy. Accounts from the set suggest an environment of quiet intensity, long takes, restrained dialogue, heavy atmosphere. Jane Petrie's costumes grounded the story in a specific, faded reality of Northern England. Chris Oddy's production design turned ordinary streets into haunted landscapes of memory. And when Bobby Kurlick, known for Midsommar's unsettling score, signed on, the soundscape promised to blur the line between psychological tension and emotional rupture. But here lies the paradox. For an actor who swore the process once nearly destroyed him, Daniel willingly plunged back into a role that demanded rawness, fragility, exposure. Was this catharsis or self-destruction? And so, with cameras rolling and history watching, Anemone became more than a film. It became a mirror, a test. Could Daniel Day-Lewis return on his own terms? Or would the act of returning reopen the wounds that never healed? The return of Daniel Day-Lewis doesn't just affect one film. It ripples across the entire world of cinema. His absence left a vacuum. For nearly a decade, critics debated whether acting itself had lost one of its purest practitioners. His comeback in Anemone has reignited that conversation, but with a different edge. Because this isn't a franchise tentpole, nor an easy awards bait drama. This is an uncompromising psychological story, guided by a first-time director, carried on intimate performances, and infused with generational collaboration. And that choice sends a message. Day-Lewis didn't return for the money, the glory, or the spotlight. He returned for something personal. That alone reshapes how audiences see the film and how they see him. For Hollywood, his reappearance is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it proves the enduring power of artistry in an industry often dominated by commercial spectacle. On the other, it raises impossible expectations. Every critic, every fan, will measure Anemone against not just other films of 2025, but against the myth of Daniel Day-Lewis himself. And myths are nearly impossible to match. Culturally, the impact is just as profound. In an era where celebrity comebacks often feel calculated or cynical, Day-Lewis's return feels fragile, almost reluctant. That vulnerability resonates. It reframes the narrative of retirement and legacy. Can an artist truly step away? Or is the creative impulse too deeply woven into the fabric of identity? And then there's the family dimension. A father and son shaping a film together. It isn't just an artistic partnership, it's generational handoff. To some, it feels like Daniel's legacy is being passed down, not in awards or accolades, but in collaboration. For Ronan, it's a debut stamped with extraordinary weight. For Daniel, it's a statement that the act of creation is strongest when shared with those we love. So what does it all mean? It means Anemone is more than a film festival premiere, more than a box office release. It is a cultural reckoning, a reminder that cinema, at its best, isn't about spectacle, it's about connection. And when Daniel Day-Lewis stepped back into the frame, he didn't just revive his career. He reignited the debate about what it means to give yourself fully to art, and what it costs to come back. And so, we arrive here, on the edge of history. Anemone isn't simply the latest entry in Daniel Day-Lewis's career. It is, in many ways, the summation of it. A story about estrangement, about reconciliation, about silence and return. But above all, it's about the cost of creating, and the refusal to let that cost define the end. For nearly a decade, the myth of Daniel Day-Lewis was built on absence, on the idea that he had walked away forever, untouchable, preserved in perfection. And now, with his return, that myth has shifted, because what we see isn't a marble statue, untarnished. What we see is a man, flawed, weary, uncertain, but still willing to give everything he has, one more time, for the sake of art. Working under his son's direction makes this return almost poetic. The greatest actor of his generation, stepping into a role crafted by family, guided not by Hollywood machinery, but by intimacy. It tells us that for Day-Lewis, acting has never been about fame, or red carpets, or headlines. It has always been about truth. And sometimes, truth means coming back. As audiences prepare to watch Anemone premiere at the New York Film Festival, they aren't just waiting for a movie. They are waiting to witness a resurrection. To see whether Daniel Day-Lewis, the man who walked away at the height of his powers, can still command the screen with the same ferocity, the same fragility, the same haunting intensity. But maybe the question isn't whether he can. Maybe the real question is, why do we demand it of him? Why do we ask artists to burn themselves for our catharsis, to bleed for our stories? Daniel Day-Lewis has lived that contradiction more deeply than anyone. And yet, here he is, returning not because the world demanded it, but because he chose it. So when Anemone unspools before the world, it won't just be a film. It will be a reckoning, a reminder that the end is never truly the end, that silence can break, that distance can close, that even the most reluctant artist may find his way back to the light. This is not just Daniel Day-Lewis's comeback. This is his legacy, reborn.